Okay, so the first part of this tutorial ended on this slide. We had just looked at how to write the very first sentence of a piece of descriptive writing or of a story, which sets an overview of the weather and begins with the fronted prepositional phrase. So I wrote the sentence, as grey clouds continued to gather overhead, fine spots of rain fell from the sky, dampening the sand. So I've intimated that this is obviously set on a beach because I've referenced sand, and I've started by setting the scene, and it's not the most, it's a bit of a sort of morose scene. So I can now go on to my second sentence, which obviously is going to carry on from the first one. And in this one, I've suggested that a good way to do it is to establish the time of day. So we can just open sentence 2 with the phrase "it was." So it's a nice, easy opening. So I can simply say "it was." Now, I'm going to set it early in the morning because, as I say, when I introduce my character on the beach, I want it to seem slightly strange for him to be there. So I'm going to say it was early in the morning and the beach. So I've said it was early in the morning, and now I'm obviously I want my readers to know where I am. I've said there's sand, so they've probably already inferred that it's the beach, but I want to say it. So it was early in the morning and the beach was completely deserted. So second sentence, nice and easy, because I've given an overview of what the weather's like. Oh, spelling, oh gosh, I've gone horribly wrong there. Yeah, so I've given an overview of the weather and I've introduced the location. So my third sentence can then develop that. And I think a nice way is to add a sound, because we've said something visual about the grey sky. We've established where we are. So now I can potentially introduce my introduce a sound. I'm on a beach, so it's logical, isn't it, that what I'm going to hear is the sound of the waves. So I could just simply say the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks filled the air. Yeah. Actually, I'll change that. Crashing against the rocks, and the seagulls, let's add in some gulls, squawking overhead filled the silence. Let's go with. Sounds a bit more dramatic than filled the air, doesn't it? Okay, so the sound of waves crashing against the rocks and the seagulls squawking overhead filled the silence. So again, I'm building up this empty scene. So I've got 3 sentences so far, and we can read them all through. As grey clouds continued to gather overhead, fine spots of rain fell from the sky, dampening the sand. It was early in the morning and the beach was completely deserted. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks and seagulls squawking overhead filled the silence. Just gradually building up my description. The last thing I want then, the last sentence, is going to be something changes. So I've said that there's grey clouds, there's spots of rain. I could perhaps make that worse, but I think I'm going to make it a bit better. My thing I think is going to change is that the sun is going to come out a little bit more. And I've suggested here we could start our sentence with another prepositional phrase, but that's not essential, as long as we create a moment of change. So let's go with maybe a bit of wind that's going to shift the clouds and reveal some feeble rays of sun. So we could say what's happening here? Technical problem. Let's get this working. So we can just say a sharp breeze correct that spelling. A correct breeze. Let's go with crept, because that's a nice bit of personification, isn't it? A sharp breeze crept through the air. Maybe dislodging the clouds and allowing feeble rays of sunlight to break through. A sharp breeze crept through the air, dislodging the clouds and allowing feeble rays of sunlight to break through. So I feel pretty happy with that. I've only got 4 sentences, and obviously I may add more detail as I go through my narrative, but I feel like I've set the scene. Either the reader knows exactly where we are, we're on a beach, the reader knows exactly what it feels like to be there. It's a bit cold and a bit gloomy, and I've established an atmosphere of mourning, which is key to what's going to happen later in my story. So as I say, in the exam, it's not as easy as just writing 4 sentences to build a paragraph on whatever you want, because you are going to have a task and a picture. But you can use this and just build up this, use this format to build up a paragraph. So I would then, if I was writing this out in an exam context, I would then leave an entire line and go on to my character. Now, what I want to do as I move into paragraph 2 and I introduce my character, I want to make sure that I create a link between paragraph 1 and 2. I want to feel like everything's coherently working together, not that I'm just jumping from one bit to another. So I'm going to introduce my old man, and again, I'm going to aim for 5 sentences here. And what I've given you are 5 potential ways of building this paragraph. So 5 sentence stems. Obviously, you may not use these exactly because it's an exam, but they're useful for practicing with. So I always start my second paragraph with the words despite the, and then I recall something from paragraph 1. So despite the cool or the coolness of the morning air, so something negative, that it's cold on the beach. And then I can say that even though, despite that, there's a solitary figure on the beach. Obviously, I've already said that the beach is empty, so I need to introduce him as coming onto it. So despite the coolness of the morning air, a solitary figure made his way down onto the empty sands. Okay, so now I've taken this desolate, this empty and abandoned scene, and I've introduced someone into it. Despite the coolness of the morning air, a solitary figure made his way down onto the empty sands. Mysterious, we know it's a him, but that's all we know. So now I can give a bit more information about him. I can say, he must have been about 85. So I'm acting as if I don't really know my own character, as if I'm seeing him from a distance, which I just think is quite a nice way of introducing him. Now, because I've said he must have been about 85, I need to say how I know that. Now, the obvious signal here is going to be a wrinkles, but I don't want to make it sound like that's a negative. I want it to sound like this is a sign of his wisdom and that he's a really interesting character. And I'm going to again try and use a metaphor. I'm going to use the metaphor of engraved. Rather than saying he's got lots of wrinkles, I'm going to say that they were engraved by time. He must have been about 85 because deep wrinkles had been engraved into his skin by the and another line by time. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Okay. Despite the coolness of the morning air, a solitary figure made his way down onto the empty sands. He must have been about 85 because deep wrinkles had been engraved into his skin by time. I immediately feel like this is an interesting character. And obviously I can say more about his face. His face bore the signs of a life of happiness because the lines around his eyes were deep, as if he had laughed a lot. A nice happy image here, that his face bore the signs of a life of happiness because the lines around his eyes were deep as if he had laughed a lot. I want to create another moment of contrast here, so I'm going to shift in and my 4th sentence is going to focus more on his eyes, but I want to create a contrast with the happiness. So I'm going to use the word however, because that signals a moment of change. And this is a line I stole from some of my students when we did some work in class. The idea that his eyes swam with sorrow. And I think that's just a beautiful image, or even drowned with sorrow. A beautiful image that says just that happiness has been stolen away. However, his deep blue eyes were drowned with sorrow. So rather than just saying he looked tearful, it just creates a more powerful image, I think. And then lastly, I want to allow this insight into his emotions. So I want to try and kind of get an internal perspective and start shifting towards that internal perspective. So I can describe something he does every now and then. Maybe every now and then he stopped and stared longingly at the ocean. Okay, no reason why yet, but that'll become clear. So every now and then he paused and stared longingly towards the ocean. Now, in my mind, I'm already thinking that the reason he does that, he stops and stares towards the ocean, is because after his wife died, this is where he scattered her ashes. So I've got an idea in my head, but I don't need to tell my reader everything all at once. So, paragraph 1 we already built. We've got our lovely description of the scene. Now we've got our paragraph 2. We've got a character. Despite the coolness of the morning air, actually, let's go all the way back to the beginning so we can read our whole story. As grey clouds continued to gather overhead, fine spots of rain fell from the sky, dampening the sand. It was early in the morning and the beach was completely deserted. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks and the seagulls squawking overhead filled the silence. A sharp breeze crept through the air, dislodging the clouds and allowing feeble rays of sunlight to break through. Despite the coolness of the morning air, a solitary figure made his way down onto the empty sand. He must have been about 85, because deep wrinkles had been engraved into his skin by time. His face bore the signs of a life of happiness, because the lines around his eyes were deep, as if he had laughed a lot. However, his deep blue eyes were drowned with sorrow. Every now and then he paused and stared longingly towards the ocean. So 2 paragraphs. Neither of them are terribly long. Both of them have a very specific function. Building the scene, introducing the character. In the next tutorial, we'll get on to paragraph 3 and how we use the flashback as a tool to create this non-linear narrative and to tell his story a little bit more. Why not have a go? Why not have a go at creating your own character? Maybe a teenage girl or a teenage boy. A character, whoever you want, but maybe slightly different to mine. Using my prompts, using the same structure, just anyone at random. Maybe our young woman. Maybe you could use the same structure to write a paragraph that describes this young woman. Okay? Once you've had a go at practicing, have a go, move on to tutorial 3, and as I say, we'll move on to the next paragraph.